today's topic is an application of Ubuntu in building social cohesion in a multicultural church in South Africa. Now, I now invite our colleagues, Dr. Ntseno and Dr. Mzondi, to switch on their cameras and to unmute their microphones as we begin today's proceedings. The session will follow this format. So we begin with a direct time of engagement with our speakers before we actually move on to Q&A with those in the audience. So as we listen to our colleagues sharing from their experiences and their vast reservoirs of knowledge, we would invite you to write down your questions, to prepare them beforehand, so that when we transition to Q&A, your question will be registered timelessly. So it is with that we begin today's session. And I would like to ask our speakers a question regarding African food. So before we launch in Ubuntu, I want to begin with food. So nzobuza Dr. Mzondi, amangqina, amaqebelengwane kumbe umngqushu. Which one do you prefer, sir? Over to you.
Well, Baba, amangqina enkomo namangqina elokuzana emvu iyona nje ngingawathatha tata.
Fantastic. So we have one vote for amangqina. Perhaps Dr. Ntseno can explain to us what amangqina is, as I ask him the same question. Amangqina, amaqebelengwane kumbe umngqushu. Which do you prefer?
Right, thanks. Let me first explain what those clicks are about. So amangqina, for those who do not know, they are part of the food that many people will not get to see in their plates, and those will be the trotters or the feet of the sheep or of the cow, as it has been highlighted. And to respond to the question, unfortunately, my favorite food, which was umngqushu, that is served with beans and sometimes with meat, when I passed 40, my system could no longer handle it. So I'm left with idombolo. So that you make idombolo anytime, I will smile and I'll come to your house. So thanks.
So there you have it, colleagues. Should you want to invite Dr. Mzondi to your house, the food to cook is amangqina. Amangqina. You can ask for the recipe from him. And if you would like to invite Dr. Ntseno to your home, idombolo is the food to cook. Otherwise, if you would like to see how his body reacts, the word to use there is umngqushu. So it is with that I welcome everyone to this room on that culinary note, and I'm sure we shall see Top Chef with amangqina soon. I am protesting, and I would like to see Top Chef with amangqina soon, but that's besides the point. Today we are looking at application of Ubuntu in building social cohesion in a multicultural church in South Africa. And it is with that I begin by posing a question to Dr. Mzondi. Dr. Mzondi, how would you define Ubuntu from a South African perspective? Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. A South African perspective of Ubuntu has various definitions which are focusing on various aspects of academia. And for me, the simplest way of defining Ubuntu would be Ubuntu is an African way that encompasses the political, religious, social, and philosophical life of Africans.
Brilliantly put. So from your definition, I'm hearing different directions in which Ubuntu goes. So it's not only limited to the social, but it touches on the political and other aspects of African existence. So can an African be an African without engaging Ubuntu? Will be my follow-up question. Over to you.
Well, that your question presupposes that you can divide me into two sections, which is not what is happening in the Ubuntu worldview. We view life holistically. Once I do anything, I walk, I talk, I sleep, and I play from my perspective of Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is intrinsically who I am, what I do, how I think, and how I view everything in life. So there's no way of separating politics, economics, spirituality, even family and parenthood from Ubuntu. Everything is included. Once you talk of Ubuntu, it's talk of holistic view of everything in life, the spiritual and the tangible. Thanks.
Fantastically put. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Ntseno, would you like to augment, add, or even footnote what has been shared? Please feel free.
Well, thanks, Chair. I think Dr. Modisa has put it so well, and I would dare not do that given that we are talking to a champion of Ubuntu. So I'll reserve my comment for now so that when you bombard me with my question, I'm able to. So let that cup pass by me.
I see somebody has been visiting Gethsemane, but we shall see what cup it shall be later on. Thank you so much for that. Let's move on to the second question that I've for Dr. Mzondi. What role did Ubuntu play in the peaceful transition of political power in South Africa? I repeat the question for the benefit of those at the back. What role did Ubuntu play in the peaceful transition of power, political power that is, in South Africa? Over to you.
Yeah, undoubtedly, the peaceful transition from apartheid to a new democracy was embedded in the application of Ubuntu. We will remember that after the 1994 general elections, when a new administration was voted in, the ANC came into power, and the president of the ANC then, with his cabinet that was mainly composed of the ANC, up, adopted that a commission be established to look into the past so that we can bring healing, reconciliation, and social cohesion in the country. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu was chosen as the chair of the commission, and the commission was called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which its mandate was to look into the past of apartheid. Not only do that, see how we can bring reconciliation and how we can move into a united nation or united vision. And in that process, and before the commission was established, first of all, Bishop Tutu christened this nation as a rainbow nation because he was indicating that this is a nation that includes many people from diverse backgrounds and from diverse communities. So you used the rainbow as a way of explaining and describing who you are as a new nation, and he called it the Rainbow Nation of God. And after that, the media and everybody else, including the president, began calling this new nation the Rainbow Nation. So out of that, the Truth Commission then was based on how the views of Archbishop Tutu based on his Ubuntu worldview that for us to attain a peaceful transition and move forward, then we will have to bring forgiveness based on our worldview of Ubuntu. And he pleaded to the victims and perpetrators of apartheid to use that worldview, forgive one another, bring uh, bring reconciliation, and to make ways that would actually help us move as a nation. Hence, the contribution of Ubuntu was that immense in that way, in a way that after the negotiation process of Codesa, then the following process was implemented by the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, then who based the Truth and Reconciliation Committee on the premises of Ubuntu. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mzondi, for that narration and description of how Ubuntu played a role in forming the very roots of this nation. Now, I would like to double click on that one, if I may, and ask how effective the Truth and Reconciliation Committee was in achieving that which was reliant on Ubuntu. So, in your estimation, how effective was the Truth and Reconciliation Committee or Commission in establishing that which relied on Ubuntu? Over to you.
There are 2,000 views to look into that question. The first was that in terms of the victims forgiving the perpetrators, that was achieved. The victims forgave, and some healing was introduced in their lives and in their psyche. On the negative side is that the perpetrators went away forgiven, but nothing was done in terms of reparation to ensure that the perpetrators are helped to move on with their lives. You remember that people died, people were killed in different ways and in various ways during the apartheid era. And some were victimized, some were maimed, some uh, uh, lost parents, some lost property, and some were psychologically hurt and affected. So the perpetrators obtained forgiveness and went on with their lives, whilst the victims remained with the head even, remained with being having nothing in terms of being uh, assisted to go on with life. And hence, you have people who began to critique the TRC as a tool that did not bring proper reconciliation and bring proper benefits for the victims who receive no financial means, who receive no but only receive some counseling there and then. So in that way, there was no benefit for the for the victims, but only for the perpetrators. Hence, uh, some years later, in the in the in the in the institutions of higher learning, the roads must fall and the fish must fall. Hashtag roads must fall and fish must fall. Fish must fall campaign emerged because this generation was saying our parents forgave, our parents reconciled, but the kind of forgiveness and reconciliation was not yielding results to them as a new generation who were involved in issues of in institutions of higher learning, where they could see that things are still the same, where they were questioning the state of roads and other issues at higher learning, where they're also questioning the issue of knowledge, where knowledge was still colonized. So the generation of Mandela and the others was accused by this generation that they have actually betrayed them and sold them because nothing has changed for them. As we see now, our country has the highest gap between the rich and the poor in the world. And this is a new country, this is a new nation, that is called the Rainbow Nation. But the gap between the rich and the poor is very, very high. And this is one of the issues that is really stepping. Once we talk of the benefits of the TRC and how Ubuntu has actually helped to create this kind of a nation. So yes, there are those who say there were benefits, and there are those who say there were no benefits. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mzondi. I will switch over now to Dr. Ntseno, and we'll begin with a question around South Africa's journey to the present day. So it is almost 30 years since South Africa embarked on a journey towards social cohesion. Dr. Mzondi was just speaking about the Rainbow Nation, a vision that existed in the Archbishop Desmond Tutu's mind, articulated in multiple arenas as well. So it's been 30 years since South Africa has gone down the route or towards the route of social cohesion. What are some of the lingering hindrances towards achieving the goal of social cohesion more equitably? Over to you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to my colleague, Dr. Mzondi. Thank you for that background and laying it well for me to happily build upon it. Look, historical footprints created this most disjointed society that we have. And it has left hundreds and millions with emotionally unhealthy, behavior, which is expressed in anger, rage, prejudice, jealousy, hatred, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, of the pillars and of the expressions of where Ubuntu can play a role, political ideologies seem to be blunted in addressing these social menaces. And ecclesiastical communities are caught with the lowered heads of shame because seeing that the charismatic activities seem to be bearing no fruit. And I would want to, at this point, maybe harness and only focus on one part of a definition of Ubuntu, and that is restoration of dignity, because Ubuntu speaks of seriti, istunzi, and that is dignity. And therefore, when one talks about Ubuntu, one would have to understand that there's a group of people, there are groups of people who are undignified. And for fear of being quoted otherwise, I have a colleague of mine who is in the screen, I will not mention his name, who something that happened, I want to the fore, who understand, and he says, it is difficult to help to restore someone's dignity when there is no understanding, no interest in how that person or group of people were undignified. And if we talk about Ubuntu and we talk about dignity, one has to start and one has to consider, do I care you lost your dignity? Do I even know you lost your dignity? So that when we start talking about restoration and talking about Ubuntu and start trying to evaluate what has happened in the last 30 years, then we can start there. Because otherwise, we can cut and paste what we think should be what the society of South Africa should look like, but we'll be addressing the wrong issues. And allow me, therefore, to say, restoration of human dignity is not a tick on a checkbox of some sort that we have done this and we've ticked it. Because this requires more than just what some South Africans are willing to do. In fact, that there are parts of our nation that are not brave, because I realize in order to restore what has been stolen or has been undignified or has been taken from some people, it requires sacrifice. Sacrifice cannot be done by an unwilling sacrificial person or sacrifice. You have to be willing to give. And so, the few of us, or the few amongst us who have chosen to do this, it has cost them a lot. As families, but we know it's possible. We know that restoring dignity to others, it's something that we as a human race can do. And I use the word race carelessly, hoping Dr. Modisa will push back around that word race. Now, I would like to add that dignity can only be restored if we consider each other as fully human. And we that others from being treated as 30, 60, we will continue to do so. And what I mean by doing so, we'll continue to dehumanize and entrench with more systems to others. So my 30 years analysis of the progress of cohesion is somehow lacking more than I would want to praise it. There's much more to praise of what has happened in 30 years. But that we are building on an unequal footing, we are building on an unclear position, I would submit to you that the issue of dignity should come to the fore, and I will myself only on the issue of dignity to say, if we can and at least focus on that, then
Dr. Ntseno, thank you so much for that. Your sound was a bit choppy in some spaces, but we got the heart and the clarity of your communication vis-a-vis the main point. So you spoke on dignity and the restoration of dignity as being part and parcel of the Ubuntu project. So to be human is a starting position of Ubuntu. So we recognize humanity and we restore that which is broken vis-a-vis humanity. My question would love to double click on the dignity component. And I would like to ask, is it possible to restore somebody's dignity unless one enters their social space? And how can we do that within a South African context? Over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope my sound will do better. I think building on what Dr. Modisa described as our view of Ubuntu, and that there is no separation as to whether it's political, spiritual, or social life for us as Africans. Therefore, the answer is a definite no. If we're going to talk about giving or restoring dignity, it has to be on all social spaces. It has to be even how I talk to you. It has to be how I talk about you in your absence. It has to be about how I make jokes about you. So this is an all-encompassing position. It has to be something from within yourself that you choose to recognize the other person as a human. It can't be something that you do because you see me. It can't be something that you give to me because I've got an earned PhD and therefore now you're giving me the opportunity to be human. No, I have to be human first, formed in the image of God. That is your starting point.
So much for that response. And I love the connection between Genesis 1, 26, 27, and also all men are created echo that is very much grounded in scripture. So when one speaks of the equality of human beings, it is not something that is born out of a social project, but it is something that we hear the scriptures highlight more than once. James tells us not to insult somebody who's created in the image of God. So it's a wonderful picture that you present to us. And I'd like to continue in this line to ask a few questions to Dr. Modisa. Given your definition of Ubuntu, Dr. Mzondi, would you say Ubuntu is embraced by all in South Africa? If so, how? If not, why? I'll repeat the question. Given your definition of Ubuntu, would you say Ubuntu is embraced by all in South Africa? If so, how is it embraced? And if not, why is it not embraced? Your thoughts around this, if you may, please. Over to you. I see we've been joined by Josué. Josué, I don't know if you're French speaking. Bonjour, si tu parles. Je pense que vous allez bien, monsieur. C'était très, très bien de te voir. Est-ce que c'est possible pour just to switch off the video for the benefit of this conversation, and then we'll invite you during the Q&A. It's wonderful to have you with us. Welcome, brother.
Thank you, Chair, for your question. I think what we need to understand is that this new society, which is called the Rainbow Nation, consists of many different groups. The majority of which are Africans who inherently practice and live Ubuntu. And we have other sections who Ubuntu is foreign to them and see it as a lower class of lifestyle or worldview. So there has been a few people in all the colors of the rainbow who have embraced Ubuntu. For an example, someone like Dr. Brutrake, Professor Augustine Schute, and others have embraced Ubuntu, looked into what Ubuntu is all about, and actually created projects and programs that advances how we as a nation can live the Ubuntu way. And There are those who really don't care and don't see any benefit in doing that and in walking along that path. And they continue to see their worldview, which is mainly Western, as their defining way of who they are. However, I must say this: Ubuntu is not only for Africans. Anyone can be an Ubuntu. Once you behave in a certain way, do certain things, we call you Mutu, Umutu. You are Umuntu because you display certain elements and characteristics of Ubuntu. And it also must be understood that Ubuntu is very difficult to define in a certain way. Though my definition tried to encompass what I was saying, but Ubuntu can be embraced by each and everyone who wishes to live up to his values, up to his characteristics, and up to those things which are identified as depicting or reflecting, as Dr. Ntseno said, seriti in what you do. So there is no way where anyone can be excluded from Ubuntu. You can be accepted as Ubuntu or Motu by how you live, how you conduct yourself, how you view things, and how you interact with other people. Then in that way, Ubuntu. Thanks.
Wonderful response. Thank you so much. And there's so many touch points with the biblical narrative in that we hear of honorable living that flows from the cross. And this can be harnessed into the conversation around building ethical formation within African society and beyond. I love the way that the Boston Celtics, I've told the story before, a basketball team heard about Ubuntu, learned about Ubuntu and adopted it in their basketballing. And they won the 2007 championship because they lived together using Ubuntu as a philosophy, or should I say, a way of being for their season together. So it has expressed itself beyond the borders of Africa, one may say. So thank you so much, Dr. Mzondi, for that. Let me move over to Dr. Ntseno. Dr. Ntseno, does a multicultural church exist? If so, how would you define it? Over to you.
Beautiful question. Thanks, Chair. And I would want to start it from this point and maybe harness on the issue of social cohesion. That it's important, Dr. Manyika, that we at least understand that when we talk about a multicultural church and its existence, we have few assumptions that we have made by so saying. And I would start by saying one of the assumptions we've made is there's been some cohesion in that church. They are together, they have done certain things right. But maybe we have to define social cohesion in order for us to understand the multicultural church. It is often defined as a collection of qualities that society should or should not have, including strength of social relations, shared values, and communities of interpretation, and feelings of common identity and a sense of belonging to the same community, trust among societal members, as well as extent of inequality or disparities. And I think in that definition, one is faced with a glaring picture of the not so response to say the multicultural church in South Africa there's a strive to have it exist. But what we have other cultures joining alongside a particular culture, and there's a dominant culture. And I think if we're going to talk about the multicultural church in South Africa, we're going to have to first start by asking the issue of dignity, to say, do we afford the same dignity or respect, if you would, to all cultures? And if the answer is somewhat progressive from that point, then we'll get to the next point. Then say, have all those cultures bowed to Christ? And that means all the cultures must come and bow their knee to Christ. And when that has happened, only then we can have a church that is multicultural. Because at that point, we would leave the cross, all of us will leave the cross, not with our cultures, but with the transformed culture, which is a Christ-like culture. We will live there all together as sons of God. And then won't even care to be called multicultural, but will care to be called the sons of God.
You're tickling some very interesting tones there, and I'm loving where you're going with that. And I'm hearing some echoes from the chat box from a certain Boshoff who's, I think it's is that spelled amen? No, it's powerful. So there you go. A recommendation from our colleague Rudolph there. Thank you so much for that response. And it's quite an important point that you're making. And I want to transition to Dr. Mzondi in a moment, because what you're highlighting for us is that not all cultures are beginning from the same starting point in South Africa. And so there's a need for us to take an honest assessment of what power, what resources, what opportunities our culture slash our tribe has before we start speaking about social cohesion. Because we cannot be cohesive without asking those deep questions. But thank you so much for that. I don't know if you want to add to that before I transition to Dr. Mzondi. Over to you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I might lead you a bit to your next one. We'll find a way, because I think this was following that, to maybe ask myself a question: how can Ubuntu express itself in the life of a church? I know that's something else that we're trying to get to, but there's something that is connecting here as you push it back, Chair, that I would like to highlight. That, Ubuntu therefore cannot be proclaimed as a rule. So it's not something to say to the church, be cohesive into this and then come together and be one. You can't do that. It's expressed in itself, as what it says, umuntu ungumuntu gabantu, right? And when that is done and what that's understood, and as Dr. Mulisa has said, and even last time we met together, we all expressed that, even a fellow African, it's almost like you don't qualify to be umuntu just because of your skin color or the shape of your nose, but your actions somehow qualifies you, because the people where I grew up, they would look at the principal of a school who happened to be African. They say, "La principal ngumuntu," and you're thinking, what do you mean? He is umuntu. But this is a respect that is afforded to anyone who embraces that. I acknowledge you. I see you as God created you. So the Imago Dei comes very strong there. And I just want to leave it there to say, indeed, the social cohesion as we have it in South Africa, it's proven to be one-sided in value and weight. And as a result, it makes the other side have nothing to do in return.
Thank you so much for those nuances. Dr. Mzondi, anything you'd like to add on this point, please feel free.
Well, I must first say that I have never had an opportunity to work in a multicultural church. My ministry has always been in the context of the township. And in the township, obviously, we are 100% Africans. We don't have any other culture, so communities being coming to a church. In suburbs and elsewhere, that's where you find this kind of churches. And this is where I put a big question mark. When are we going to have time when people from the suburbs comes into the township and submit to someone like me who's a pastor? Are we going to see that happen? Are we going to see that kind of reversal of community happening in our country? Hence, there are thoughts that are saying the Rainbow Nation has not worked, because it has only been one group that has always reached out for reconciliation, reached out for forgiveness, reached out for social cohesion. Yet the other group continues to live as though nothing has happened, nothing has changed. And they are still in the posh, good lifestyles and houses and everything that they have, as though there are no other groups who are living in townships, in squatters, in other areas where the poor and the disadvantaged are living, where the unemployed are living. We have the highest unemployment rate of young people, which is very scary. We have the highest unemployed, poverty statistics which are also scary. So many things are in the townships, are in squatter camps where people are broiling, people are angry, people have nothing to hope for except that to believe that one day God will intervene in their situation. So once you talk of multicultural church, my challenge would be, let us see those who are in suburbs coming into townships and becoming members of our churches. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mzondi. I would love to dwell on this point just a little bit more because the assumption is townships are places of residence by choice in some quarters. The other assumption is that townships are to be avoided at all costs. I would love to go into the history of how townships were created in South Africa. So, paint the picture for us regarding the legislation and the social engineering that made townships possible. I'd like to say that I used to live in Somerset West and I had friends in Khayelitsha. And every time I drove to Khayelitsha, I was caught by the whiff of the sewers. So the sewage system was downwind to Khayelitsha. So imagine what that meant, both psychologically and also health wise. So I'd like to hear your thoughts regarding how townships came about in South Africa and the social engineering that brought them about. Over to you.
Yeah, the townships were a result of two things: the Group Areas Act, which was implemented by the National Party government, and that separated different communities from one another. And townships did not only do not only include Africans. We have townships which were created for Indian communities and so-called colored communities and African communities. And before that, we need to remember that before the National Party came into power, these people lived together in places like Sophia Town, here in Madubulavili, in Alex in Joburg, and these people were interacting well. But when the National Party came into power, all these people were displaced under the Group Areas Act, and people were removed from Sophia Town to Soweto, and Alexander to Soweto, from in my area here from Madubulaville to Mutlakeng, others to Tukomsas, others to Asatville. And then out of that, the Group Areas Act created social planning and social space, the spatial planning that determined that everything that was done for those in the community, from services to education to everything, was below standard deliberately. And hence, you find that now, 30 years after the new government, we still are in the same place. I've been living in the township since my birth, and until now, I'm still living in the township. For me to be part of this conversation, I had to leave my township, and here I'm attending this meeting in a wimpy, so that I can be able to be part of the conversation. But in my township in Mutlakeng, where I stay, there's no good internet connection. So these are issues that we must really grapple with and see. Townships were created to continue below standard lifestyle, below standard education, below standard healthcare, below standard means of worship. Everything was below standard as compared to those in the suburbs. So they were also created as labor reserves, so that those in the industrial areas can always have people to come and work. And they were also created so that at a particular time, these people would move back to where they came from. So they were never intended to be permanent place of residence. Thanks.
Dr. Mzondi, thank you so much for that. We can double click on this conversation. I think it's a symposium all by itself, but we are limited in time. As I'm hearing you speak, I'm asking myself the question, where will Jesus be found today? Where will he be going to church today? And how would he invite others to follow his pathway of interacting with brothers and sisters who are living in different communities, even as we strive for social cohesion? It's a big question, and we don't have enough time to engage it. So allow me to go to Dr. Ntseno and ask the same question. How can Ubuntu how can Ubuntu express itself in a multicultural church today? Over to you.
Thanks, Chair. The first thing that the church would have to do, which is something the church has not done, is to consider and reconsider some of the practices the church has inherited. They've inherited this as what is called church culture, but some of them are deeply dehumanizing. These are practices that we inherited them at the time when the church was as divided as we know. I came from a denomination that was 4x4, classifying the Africans and the so-called coloreds, the Indians and the white nation. And I think to this day, there's certain strategies and certain positions that we call them church culture that are still inherent. And I think when those things can be confronted, removed, and replaced, only then can Ubuntu even have a light of day. Because here's a problem. One of the challenges that we remain with is some of the false assumptions and maybe poor assumptions that were made by the earlier missionaries. And I forgive them looking back, because I can understand how difficult it must be coming to a new context and simply thinking that your culture and your context should prevail. Some of the positions they've taken, which are shaping the church culture today, are not helping in building forward, because everything African, anything non-Western was regarded as demonized. And because of that, some of the things that we treasured, some of the values that made us Ubuntu, made us humans, we had to trade them off. And then only when we became Christian, we started looking at the scriptures, we're thinking, but wait a minute, this is exactly what I grew up understanding. And I will tell you this, Dr. Manyika, as I grew up as a young man, I'll ask questions to Abantu Abadala, meaning older people. And I'll ask them, but why was this changed name? Because I identify this from how I grew up. Why was this changed name? And I'll hear an elder in the church, I'll hear somebody saying to me, listen, sir, or, they'll call me by a small boy, listen here, Quentin, you must understand, ezizinto, bekunyanzelekile uba sizenze ukuthi zifane njengabakrestu. So in other words, we had to make these things Christianized for them to be understood. But I'm thinking, but it's the same value. Dignity, valuing yourself, loving others. Some of these things didn't have to get a new language. There was already a language that is there. So I think the church will have to consider and literally take stock of things and understand that just because something is unknown to the missionary in that case or to somebody else, it doesn't make it evil. It just could take a moment to say, tell me, let me understand where you are. Because many Africans have been receptive to the gospel. That is a testament to show you that the gospel is not all completely something that Africans are not able to congruently understand. In fact, you'll understand that many Africans who have submitted themselves to the gospel, they left everything. They chucked out the good and the bad of their orientation to accept the gospel. And only after they've accepted the gospel, they realize, oh, the gospel is not so foreign after all. The only thing I had to do was to come before Christ and yield and be saved.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ntseno, for that deep explanation. Friends, as we're listening to this, I'm sure there are questions that are registering in our minds, in our hearts, and I'm sure there are some who are trigger happy chappies who would love to have the chat box ablaze. I'm sure there are those who would love to ask questions as well to our panelists. So I invite you to start engaging the chat box as we transition to the next phase of our conversation. But we still have a couple of questions for our panelists. And so I will continue with Dr. Mzondi. What benefits or challenges does this present to the church in South Africa? And I'm speaking about the objective of making Ubuntu a central cog towards social cohesion. What benefits can the church draw from using Ubuntu as a frame of appropriating gospel understanding? The second one, what challenges does it present if it is to be done properly? Over to you.
Yeah, the challenge is that intrinsically human beings are subjective, and we view things with different eyeglasses, should I say. Now we put different spectacles whilst we look at the same thing. So if you have uh, sunglasses which are tainted red, everything will be red for you. If you have sunglasses which are tainted blue, everything is going to be blue for you. If you have sunglasses which are tainted green, everything is going to be green for you. So that is the biggest problem with us human beings. Uh, we are not saying, and I'm not saying Ubuntu is 100% perfect. Ubuntu has its own negatives and its own dangers, which I must admit, need to be addressed. And what we are promoting in Ubuntu is that there are those point of conversion, point of contact between Ubuntu and the scriptures, which is what we advocate that we should promote. For instance, the belief in a divine being is central in Ubuntu. It's very rare that in Ubuntu we denounce the existence of a central being, of a divine being. We embrace it. It's a given, just like it is a given in the Jewish world. It's a given to us. So we don't struggle with issues of divinity. We embrace them. So that's a good point of departure. The other thing is the issue of human dignity. Uh, we value human dignity to an extent that we even respect those who are dead. That's how far we value dignity. So we value uh, interaction, community. Those things are valued in the cross. So the cross it brings different communities together at the foot, and that's what Ubuntu values. The cross brings the issue of the being Christ, God incarnate. That's what Ubuntu understands and see that God is part of us. The common language in Abantu to say amadlozi amangidala when things are going right, or but if things are going bad. So we always invoke the presence of God in our lives 24 hours. It's not a sabbatical thing that you do on the Sabbath and the other days you do something else. It's there already. And that's what Paul taught, that in everything that you do it unto the glory of God. So these are points of contact that we can look at so that we bring social cohesion in the church. And that will also show that the issues which flowed from the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, which actually ended up saying God is dead. In Ubuntu, we're not saying that. We said God is alive and God is the center of who we are, and that like like Paul said in the book of Acts, in Him and in Him we have our being and our moving. That's what Ubuntu is saying. We cannot move ahead, and we will not move ahead without the presence of the divine in our lives. And that's a point of contact which I think if we focus into that, walk with it, and march ahead, then we'll be able to begin this journey of social cohesion in the country, particularly in the church. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mzondi, for that. There's a phrase from some New Testament scholars will say that the air, or the very air that the early Christian breathed, was Greco-Roman. So to understand the first century world in which the gospel was presented, one needs to enter the very culture of the Greco-Roman space, and we've got countless books that are being published every year speaking about the Greco-Roman culture. And applying that same trajectory, one may say, to understand the African world, one needs to enter the space of Ubuntu, because the very air that the African breathes is Ubuntu shaped. So thank you so much for that presentation. And I think it's very important that we hear what you're saying to us there. Now, my last question in this section will be to Dr. Ntseno. what benefits, oh, sorry, that's the wrong one there. Would you care to map the possible intersection between Ubuntu, social cohesion, and a multicultural church in South Africa? And the footnote there is it attainable? Over to you.
Thank you very much. And hopefully that will answer one of the questions I see in the chat box. But also allow me to touch base on what I previously stated regarding what the church ought to do. And when I say the church, and someone may make few assumptions regarding who I'm referring to, but I would tell you that some of the practices I referred to are not only perpetuated by our white brothers, as somebody has put in the chat, but even our African brothers, they have clung to some of those practices. So it's Africa to African to an African, and so on. So these are practices that must be confronted, irrespective who does it. The same way we apply Ubuntu, whether it's to an African or to a Westerner, it's the same principle we must apply in correcting some of these positions. So that's the first thing I want to highlight. But to come to your question, Chair, regarding mapping the possible intersection, well, there is a possible intersection. And I would add to say the church is best positioned, it has resources to restore, and dare I say, redeem our nation in this challenge. The gospel as a starting point is restorative, redemptive, and dignifying. Ubuntu, in view of how it has been applied in South Africa, is an effort to promote social cohesion within a multicultural society. And it has left the church with a question. Do we as a church want to, or we prefer not to disturb our comfortable boxes that continue to deny others their humanity in our speech, actions, and even our jokes, as I said? And so this has no color. It knows no context. It knows no suburb. It's just a hard position that the church or people in church should consider. The picture of a rainbow nation, I would want to address that for a moment. Was pretty when it was painted to us. In fact, the late Archbishop made it so beautiful that we cared less at the time to interrogate it. But it was not so long after it was painted that we started looking at this picture and ask ourselves, is this picture of a rainbow appropriate to talk about, to address social cohesion as a unifying picture? And this is even before it was stolen by the other people who have stolen it recently. And I'm glad they've stolen it, because then I can happily discard it this afternoon and say, one of the challenges I see with the pictures of the rainbow, or rather the colors, talking about colors in South Africa, is that those colors never meet. And that is a problem. It keeps us separate. It keeps us within your lines. The other day I mentioned that mind your gap, mind the gap. And I think that gets highlighted when you start interrogating the issue of the Rainbow Nation. That it keeps you exactly where you are, you exactly where you are, and where your parents were, and you where your parents will end up being. Somehow it predicts even the future. And so I would dare say, I propose the church must consider going to the cross and realizing under the blood, and I may be preachy a bit here as a pastor to say, as we come to the cross and then we live there the same blood, we ought to live from there as a one people, as one nation, as sons of God, male and female. It doesn't matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ntseno, for that wonderful comment. Whatever challenge has come to us today, may I invite us to bring ourselves before the cross and ask Jesus to help us to become abantu, abahlala, abanye abantu.